Chapter 1, Ordinary Days. I always thought betrayal was something that happened to other people, stories whispered at office parties, scandalous gossip traded over coffee, or tragic tales played out on television dramas. It was never supposed to seep into the walls of my own home, never supposed to shadow the woman I loved most in the world. Her name is Emily, and for the last 6 years, she has been both my anchor and my storm. I met her in a coffee shop in downtown Seattle, the kind of place where rain-drenched windows blurred the streetlights into watercolor smears. I still remember her that day, hair tied back carelessly, glasses slipping down her nose, a half-smile forming as she typed furiously into her laptop. She was a journalism student then, full of fire, full of stories waiting to be written. Now she's 28, and I'm 32. We live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment just a few blocks away from Capitol Hill, where the streets are lined with independent bookstores, late-night diners, and bars that never really close. Our building is old brick, with creaky floors and drafty windows, but it feels alive, filled with the echoes of 100 past tenants. When I wake up to the sound of gulls screeching near the waterfront or fall asleep to the soft patter of endless Seattle rain, I think of it as home. Life with Emily has always been about the small rituals. She makes her coffee too strong in the mornings, black and scalding, while I stir too much cream into mine until it turns the color of sand. On Sundays, we grocery shop together at the Pike Place Market, weaving through the crowds, picking out fresh bread, salmon, and whatever fruit catches Emily's eye. At night, we curl on the couch and watch reruns of shows we've already memorized, just to laugh at the same jokes again. It was in those ordinary days that the cracks first began to appear, hairline fractures in a life I thought was unshakable. But of course, at the time, I didn't see them for what they were. Who does? That first chapter of suspicion didn't begin with a dramatic revelation, no lipstick on a collar, no mysterious late-night phone call I happened to answer. It began with something much smaller, almost insignificant, a change in tone. Emily had always been warm, quick to laugh, quicker to tease me about my clumsy habits or the way I left shoes in the hallway. But one night, after dinner, I noticed her voice was thinner, distracted, as though her mind had wandered somewhere far from the 4 walls of our apartment. When I asked her about her day, she gave short answers, absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone while nodding. I didn't think much of it then. Everyone has bad days. Maybe work was stressful, maybe she was tired. Still, I remember the unease creeping into my chest, small and quiet, like a draft slipping in through a cracked window. Seattle was gray that week, the kind of heavy gray that makes the whole city feel like it's underwater. I'd walk home from work through puddles reflecting neon lights, my breath fogging in the cold evening air, and I'd look forward to the warmth of our apartment, to Emily's voice greeting me. But the warmth began to feel thinner, like the heat was escaping, leaving behind only the shell of familiarity. One Friday night, I found myself watching her across the room. She was curled up on the couch, her phone in her hand, a faint smile playing on her lips. It wasn't the kind of smile I recognized, the smile she gave me when I made her laugh, or when we shared some quiet secret. No, this was softer, private, as though I wasn't part of it. "Who are you texting?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She looked up, startled, then laughed. "Just Sarah. She's going through some drama with her boyfriend again." It was believable. Sarah was her closest friend, and drama wasn't unusual in Sarah's life. Still, I couldn't shake the way Emily's thumb hovered over the screen just a moment longer than necessary before she turned it face down on the coffee table. That night, lying in bed, listening to the rain batter the windows, I told myself I was imagining things. That's what you do at first. You rationalize. You excuse. Because the alternative, the thought that the person you trust most might be slipping away, is too heavy to carry. But the seed was planted. And once suspicion takes root, it grows in silence, curling its way into every glance, every word, every pause. Chapter 2, First Doubts. The thing about doubt is that it doesn't crash through your front door like an intruder, it seeps in through the cracks, so quietly you almost don't notice it until it's already taken over the room. In the weeks that followed that Friday night, I began to notice more of those little changes. Emily still laughed with me, still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, but there was a distance in her eyes, as though part of her attention was always elsewhere. It started with her phone. Before, she'd leave it lying around without a second thought, on the counter while she showered, on the nightstand while we made dinner, sometimes forgotten in her bag until it buzzed. But now, it was always close. If she left a room, the phone went with her. At night, she began charging it on her side of the bed instead of the dresser across the room. When it lit up with a notification, her hand moved faster than I'd ever seen. I told myself it was nothing. Everyone becomes a little more protective of their privacy sometimes. Maybe she was writing something personal for her work, or maybe she was helping Sarah again. I tried not to read into it. But I noticed. One rainy Wednesday evening, I came home later than usual. The streets glistened with rain, neon signs reflecting off the slick pavement, the smell of wet concrete thick in the air. By the time I reached our apartment, I was drenched, hair plastered to my forehead. Inside, the apartment was warm, lit only by the glow of a lamp in the living room. Emily was curled up on the couch, her laptop balanced on her knees. When she saw me, she startled, actually startled, as if I'd caught her doing something she shouldn't. "Hey," I said, shaking the rain from my coat. "Didn't mean to scare you." She closed the laptop too quickly. No, it's fine. I just didn't hear you come in." There was a pause, heavy enough to notice. "What were you working on?" I asked, hanging up my coat. "Oh, just some research," she said. Her voice was casual, but her eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Freelance article stuff." I nodded, but something in my chest tightened. Emily had always been open about her writing, often reading drafts aloud to me, asking for feedback. Why shut the laptop now? We ate dinner in near silence that night. She picked at her food, eyes flicking occasionally toward her phone resting beside her plate. Each time it buzzed, her fork paused mid-air. She didn't answer the messages, just silenced the phone and turned it face down. Later, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. I listened to the rhythm of her breathing, steady, calm. I stared at the ceiling, the glow of the city lights spilling faintly through the blinds. My mind replayed every moment, her quick hand on the phone, the startled look when I walked in, the closed laptop. "You're being paranoid," I told myself. "She loves you. You're imagining things." But the human mind is cruel when it's uncertain. Once suspicion sets in, it begins to rewrite the past. Small, innocent moments suddenly seem like clues you overlooked. A late night at work becomes questionable. A vague answer transforms into a lie. The next day, I decided to push the thought aside. I buried myself in work, answered emails, sat through meetings, pretended everything was fine. But as soon as I stepped out into the drizzle of the Seattle afternoon, my thoughts drifted back to Emily. I called her on my way home. "Hey," she answered, her voice bright. "Hi, Em. Just leaving the office. Want me to pick up dinner?" There was a pause. No, that's okay. I already ate." "Already?" I glanced at my watch. It was barely 6. "Yeah," she said quickly. I was starving, so I just threw something together. Her tone was casual, but too casual, like a line rehearsed. When I got home, the kitchen was spotless. No dirty dishes, no pans drying in the rack, no smell of food lingering in the air. "What did you eat?" I asked lightly, trying not to sound like an interrogator. "Just soup," she said, pulling her phone closer as she scrolled. "From a can." I nodded, but I knew the cabinets were empty of soup. I'd checked just a couple days ago. It wasn't proof of anything. Not yet. But it was something. And once you notice the first thread, you can't stop pulling. Chapter 3, Shadows in the Routine. The city kept on with its rhythm, rain washing the streets, buses sighing as they pulled into stops, neon bleeding into puddles, but inside our apartment, the rhythm between Emily and me began to falter. It was subtle, the way music falters when someone plays a single wrong note. Most people wouldn't notice. But I did. It was in the mornings. Emily had always been a slow riser, the kind who needed 3 alarms and a strong cup of coffee before she could form complete sentences. But lately, she was awake before me, dressed and on her phone by the time I rolled out of bed. She'd smile at me when I groggily stumbled into the kitchen, but it was a distracted smile, her attention always half elsewhere. "Morning," she'd say, pouring coffee, already checking her messages. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Work, maybe. Freelance deadlines. But when I leaned over her shoulder one morning, curious, she locked the screen before I could even see it. "Hey," I said lightly, forcing a smile. "Keeping secrets from me?" She laughed, but it was too quick, too sharp. "Just emails. Boring stuff." And then she kissed my cheek and handed me my coffee, as if the warmth of that gesture could erase the chill left behind. The apartment itself began to feel different. Our place had always been lived in, stacks of books by the bed, dishes left drying in the rack, the faint smell of Emily's lavender lotion mixed with the aroma of my cheap cologne. But lately, the space felt staged, as if someone had gone through and scrubbed out the mess of our lives. The counters were spotless. The couch pillows always perfectly arranged. Emily, who used to leave her clothes draped over chairs, now folded everything neatly away. At first, I told myself she was just being tidier. But it didn't feel like tidiness. It felt like erasure. One night, I sat at the small kitchen table with my laptop open, trying to catch up on work. Emily was on the couch, phone in hand, her face lit by the screen. I watched her from the corner of my eye. She smiled faintly, bit her lip, typed something quickly. "Who are you texting?" I asked. She glanced up. "Sarah. Always Sarah. Sarah again. You two talk more than we do." Emily laughed, but her laugh didn't quite reach her eyes. "She needs me. You know how she is." I nodded, but inside something twisted. Because if Sarah truly was the one on the other end of those endless messages, why did Emily's tone change when she spoke about them? Why did she always tilt her screen away just slightly, as though protecting it from view? Seattle nights have a certain loneliness to them, even when you're not alone. The rain muffles the world, and the city lights look like distant stars caught in puddles. I'd lie awake listening to the sound of cars hissing along wet streets, Emily's back turned to me, her breathing slow and even. One night, I whispered into the dark, "Do you still love me, Em?" She stirred but didn't answer. Maybe she was asleep. Or maybe she didn't want to. The next morning, over breakfast, I almost asked her again. But instead, I swallowed the words with my coffee, burning my throat. Then came the Saturday incident. We were supposed to go grocery shopping together, as we always did. Pike Place was crowded that morning, gulls shrieking overhead, vendors calling out deals on fresh salmon and flowers. But halfway through the trip, Emily's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned, and said, "I just remembered, I need to run by the bookstore. Can you finish up here?" I blinked. "The bookstore? Right now?" "Yeah. It'll be quick. I promised Sarah I'd pick something up for her. Always Sarah." Before I could respond, she was already weaving through the crowd, her dark hair disappearing into the sea of umbrellas. I finished the shopping alone, the plastic bags cutting into my hands as I carried them back to the car. An hour passed before Emily returned, empty-handed. "Did you get the book?" I asked. She hesitated. They didn't have it. I wanted to press her. Wanted to ask why she hadn't come back sooner, why she hadn't called, why her story felt thin. But instead, I just nodded and started the car. On the drive home, we barely spoke. That night, as she showered, I found myself staring at her phone on the nightstand. My hand hovered over it, my pulse hammering. I knew her passcode, it was the date of our anniversary. But I didn't touch it. Because crossing that line meant something. It meant admitting out loud what I was still too afraid to name. So instead, I turned off the light and lay in the dark, listening to the water run, feeling the distance between us stretch wider than the bed itself. And for the first time, I wondered if the woman I loved was already gone. Chapter 4, Useless Explanations. The hardest part of doubt isn't the silence, it's the explanations. Because when you ask a question, and the answer is just a little too smooth, a little too rehearsed, you start to hear the hollowness beneath the words. It happened first on a Tuesday night. I came home earlier than usual, the office letting out before the storm rolled in. The sky was heavy with low clouds, the kind that turned the city into a gray watercolor. As I climbed the stairs to our apartment, I heard Emily's voice inside, muffled but sharp, the way someone speaks when they don't want to be overheard. I hesitated at the door, key in hand. She laughed softly, an unfamiliar laugh, lighter, almost flirtatious. Then silence. When I pushed the door open, she was in the kitchen, phone to her ear. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and within seconds she ended the call. "Hey. You're home early," she said, too brightly. "Yeah," I replied, setting down my briefcase. "Who were you talking to?" She didn't miss a beat. "Sarah. She's going through something again." Always Sarah. Always the same shield between us. I walked to the fridge, pretending to look for something. My hands felt clumsy, heavy. "Sounded like you were laughing." "Yeah," she said, slipping her phone into her pocket. She was telling me a story about her coworker. "You know how she is." Her words were smooth, confident. Too confident. I didn't push. Not then. But inside me, something shifted. The explanations continued in small ways. One night she said she had to stay late, working on an article. She came home past midnight, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers, hair mussed like she'd been caught in the wind. When I asked how the article was going, she gave me a polished summary, as if she'd prepared it in advance. Another time, she told me she'd gone for a run, even though her running shoes were spotless, their soles free of the damp grit that clings to them in Seattle weather. When I asked about it, she smiled. I wiped them down. Didn't want to track mud in here. Reasonable. Believable. But too perfect. Because Emily had never cared about mud before. I began to catalog the inconsistencies. Little things. The receipts I found in her jacket pocket from restaurants we'd never been to. The faint trace of cologne, too sharp, too masculine, clinging to her sweater. The way her eyes flicked away when I asked direct questions. But each time I confronted her, she had an answer. "Who's Mark?" I asked one evening, after spotting the name on a receipt tucked into her purse. She blinked, then laughed. "Oh, that's just Sarah's new guy. I picked up the bill once when we all went out." Smooth. Easy. As if the truth had been waiting on her tongue all along. But if Sarah really had a new guy, why hadn't Emily mentioned him sooner? Why did I only hear the name when I stumbled across it myself? The city around me seemed to mirror my unease. Seattle's winter was deepening, the rain colder, the streets slicker. Neon lights reflected in puddles like fractured glass. I'd walk home through the drizzle, passing strangers huddled beneath umbrellas, each one a ghost in the blur of headlights and rain. Inside our apartment, the air felt colder despite the heat. We moved around each other like shadows, speaking in half-sentences, filling the silence with explanations that didn't quite hold. One night, I finally broke. We were sitting on the couch, the TV playing some sitcom neither of us was watching. Emily's phone buzzed, lighting up on the coffee table. She reached for it instinctively. "Can I see?" I asked suddenly. Her hand froze mid-air. "See what?" "Your phone." Her eyes narrowed, then softened into a laugh. "Why? Don't you trust me?" It was the kind of question designed to turn suspicion into guilt, to make me feel ashamed for asking. I forced a smile. "Of course I trust you. I was just curious." She slid the phone off the table and into her lap. "There's nothing to see. Just Sarah, as always." Her voice was calm, her posture relaxed. A perfect performance. But I noticed the way her thumb hovered over the lock screen, as if guarding it. And in that moment, I realized something. It wasn't that her explanations were unbelievable. They were too believable. So polished, so prepared, they felt like armor. And armor only exists when there's something to protect. Chapter 5, Gathering Evidence. I used to think of myself as a rational man. Calm. Measured. The kind of person who looked at facts before feelings. But suspicion corrodes that. It eats away at the part of you that trusts, leaving only instinct and hunger for confirmation. By the time January rolled in, I found myself no longer just noticing the cracks, I was searching for them. It started with her purse. Emily had left it on the chair one evening when she went to shower. My heart hammered as I reached for it, fingers trembling like I was a thief in my own home. I told myself I wasn't doing this out of jealousy, but out of necessity. I needed to know. Inside, it smelled faintly of her perfume, lavender with a trace of something sharp. Her wallet. Lipstick. Loose change. And then, folded in half, a crumpled receipt. A restaurant. Downtown. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine. The date was a Wednesday night, the same night she'd told me she was working late. My breath caught in my throat. I tucked the receipt back where I found it, my hands shaking so badly the paper crackled. When Emily came out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her, steam curling into the hallway, she smiled at me like nothing was wrong. And I smiled back, my lips dry and cracking. From that night forward, I started keeping a mental log. What time she left the apartment. How long she was gone. What she wore. The excuses she gave. I started noticing the little details I'd once ignored, the faint traces of cologne that weren't mine, the way her lipstick looked freshly applied after she'd supposedly been at the library, the constant hum of her phone buzzing at night. Once, when she was in the shower, I turned the phone over on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a notification, just a first name, no last name. Mark. Not Sarah. I stared at it until the screen went dark again, my pulse pounding in my ears. Seattle's winter pressed harder. Rain turned to sleet, glazing the sidewalks in slippery glass. The city felt hostile, the cold seeping into my bones as I walked home from work each night, my thoughts circling endlessly. One evening, I decided to test her. "I might come by your office tomorrow," I said casually over dinner. "Bring you lunch." Her fork froze mid-air. Just for a second. But I saw it. Then she smiled. Too quickly. "That's sweet, but tomorrow's crazy. Meetings all day. I won't even have time for lunch." Her words were smooth, but her eyes betrayed the tiniest flicker of panic. I nodded, pretending to accept it, though inside something tightened like a noose. It wasn't just the lies. It was the way she filled them with details. One night she came home late, claiming she'd been helping Sarah with her car. She described the whole ordeal, Sarah stranded, the cold wind, the stubborn battery. Her story was flawless, textured, believable. Too believable. The next day, I called Sarah, under the guise of checking in. She sounded surprised. "My car?" "No, It's fine. Why? I forced a laugh, made up some excuse, hung up. When I saw Emily that evening, I studied her face as she told me about her day, her eyes steady, her voice calm. If I hadn't called Sarah, I would have believed her. And that terrified me more than anything. I began to follow her. Not every time, not openly, but enough to catch glimpses. One Friday evening, she told me she was meeting Sarah for drinks. I waited 10 minutes after she left, then slipped on my coat and followed. Seattle at night was alive with neon and fog. The streets pulsed with traffic, headlights smeared across the wet pavement. I kept my distance, heart pounding, as she turned down Pike Street. She didn't go to the bar she'd mentioned. She walked 2 blocks further, into a quieter street lined with smaller restaurants. And there he was. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat. She smiled when she saw him, that same private smile I'd seen on her face when she texted. They hugged, too long, too close, and then slipped into a restaurant together. I stood across the street in the rain, the city spinning around me. My world tilted, the sounds of traffic fading to a dull roar in my ears. She was supposed to be with Sarah. Instead, she was here, with him. I didn't go inside. I couldn't. My legs felt like stone. I stood in the drizzle until my hair was plastered to my forehead, until the cold sank into my skin, until I couldn't feel my hands. Then I turned and walked home, each step heavier than the last. When Emily returned later that night, cheeks flushed, she smiled as if nothing had happened. She smelled faintly of wine. How was Sarah? I asked, my voice steady though my chest was burning. She's good, Emily said smoothly, slipping out of her coat. We needed that catch-up. And in that moment, watching her lie so effortlessly, I realized something chilling. I wasn't just gathering evidence against her. I was gathering evidence against myself. Against the version of me that still wanted to believe her. And piece by piece, that version was dying. Final chapter, the reckoning. The evidence had piled up. The receipts. The late nights. The smell of someone else clinging to her clothes. And that night in the restaurant, seeing her smile at him, touch his arm, laugh the way she used to with me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I knew. I waited until Saturday evening, the sky heavy with rain, streets reflecting neon like broken glass. Emily was curled up on the couch, her laptop open, scrolling through something. I didn't say a word. I just watched her, every little movement amplified in my chest. Finally, I spoke. Emily, my voice was low, steady, but my hands shook. We need to talk. She looked up, startled. Then, carefully, she closed the laptop. About what? I know, I said simply. I know about Mark. About the nights you said you were with Sarah. I saw you. I have the receipts. The messages. I've followed you. Everything. Her face changed. First a flash of guilt, then surprise, then anger. You've been following me. I had to know, I said, my throat tight. Because every day, every lie, it felt like you were disappearing from me. And now I know why. She stood up, pacing the small living room. You don't understand. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I said, trying to keep calm. You've been with him. You've lied to me. You've stolen us from each other. Her hands trembled, her voice rising. I didn't mean to. It just happened. You've been so distant. You never notice me anymore. I felt the sting of her words, the twist of truth and manipulation. Distant? I've been here. I've tried. I've loved you every day. But you weren't here. You weren't us anymore. You were somewhere else. Silence fell. The only sound was the rain, drumming against the window like a slow, relentless clock counting down everything we had lost. I stepped closer, my chest tight, every heartbeat a hammer. "Do you love him?" I asked quietly, almost hoping for a lie I could cling to. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know. Maybe. And that was it. That was the truth. A quiet, devastating truth that shattered the life we'd built. I walked to the bedroom, grabbed my coat. "I can't do this anymore. I can't live in the shadow of your lies. You can stay, you can leave, I don't care, but I'm leaving this life behind. I'm done." She ran after me. "Wait. Don't go like this." "I have to," I said. "I loved you. I still love you. But love isn't enough when it's one-sided. You made your choice. Now I have to make mine." I left the apartment, the rain soaking through my coat, washing away the suffocating heaviness. The city was cold, gray, indifferent, but at least it was honest. It didn't hide behind smiles or excuses. I didn't know what the future held. Maybe she would come after me. Maybe she wouldn't. Maybe one day I'd forgive her, or maybe I'd learn to live without her. But as I walked through the neon reflections on wet pavement, I felt something I hadn't in months: clarity. Betrayal cuts deep. It leaves scars that never fully heal. But it also reveals the truth. And in that revelation, there is power, the power to walk away, to reclaim yourself, and to stop living in the shadows of someone else's deceit. I didn't know if I'd ever love again the way I loved her. But I knew I would survive. And sometimes, surviving is the only victory you need.